Thanks so much for joining this morning. For this week's session, I'm super excited. We are going to be deep diving on how to master the call for papers, and we are joined by two masters. We have a quick kickoff question, and we just want to know, right? Call for sessions, call for papers, it's known by many names. What do you call your call? What is your call? So we just thought this would be a fun way to get things started. Let us know how you position your call for sessions. And also get active in the chat. So let us know who you are, who you're with, what events do you own and work on. And if you have questions throughout, we're going to seed them. So if you want us to go deeper on a topic, we're going to pull that out, and we'll also save questions for the end as well. And for those of you also feeling brave enough, we hold the reins pretty loosely here. So if you want to jump into the conversation, all you have to do is select the raise your hand feature, and I will allow you to talk, and you can come and join us on stage and ask a question, add a comment. So we want to keep these as dynamic and fresh as possible. So it looks like about 34% of folks do a call for speakers, 11% call for sessions, call for papers, call for proposals is 22%. There's an other. If you selected other, let us know in the chat. What do you call it? What do you call your call? This was great. All right. And it looks like about 86% of you have participated. So thanks so much for getting active and engaging with us first thing. Okay. I'm going to let that poll keep running. Rachel and Stephanie, welcome, welcome. Do you want to just quickly introduce yourselves? Let us know who you are and a little bit of background, both personally and professionally. And Rachel, I think I'm going to put you in the hot seat first.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. I'm Rachel Cohen. I live in Boston, and I lead the event content program for GitHub, which includes our annual conference Universe, our annual flagship event, as well as a few other internal and external programs. I have a great team, Michelle and Maddie, if you're on. Hi. And I've been doing this for about 15 years, primarily in tech, primarily working on events of that type. Stephanie and I have both been members of the Event Content Council for a few years. So for those who don't know, it's a small group of us who do this work, who think about these kinds of things all the time and get together monthly. So let us know if you're interested in joining, and we can make sure you're added to our monthly list. And I spend most mornings doing the crossword puzzle. I'm a huge crossword puzzle nerd. So that's a fun fact about me. Off to you, Steph.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Stephanie Wells. I've been working in events for about 20 years. And I used to say I was working in event content for 10 of those years, but I did the math, and I think it's more like 15. So yeah, this is really my area of focus. I'm from the California Bay Area. I currently live up in California Gold Country. So you can see my sort of mining tins on the wall over here. And just like Rachel, these days I focus on event content largely for enterprise tech companies. Although I recently joined a company called Skillable, where we do all kinds of events for all kinds of companies. So really excited to kick off this conversation this morning.
Beautiful. And thanks so much for giving your time and joining us. Mike Dunlap, you raised your hand. I'm just curious if you're let's just test this. Was this an accident, or are you looking to join in real time? Mike, I'm going to allow you to talk. Hey, Mike.
Hey there. I didn't realize I raised my hand, but my hand is raised. So I'll introduce myself. I'm a program director here at Worldwide Business Research, where I oversee program content for a series of events specifically for the procurement industry and expertise, and just want to hear a little bit more about how other people are doing this.
Beautiful. Well,
and I can
thanks
turn my camera on too, if somehow. We'll just stick with the audio for now. So
It's all good. Well, thanks so much for jumping up, and thanks for joining.
All right.
Awesome. All right, Rachel, kick us off. I would love for you to dive in on just share your ethos around call for sessions.
Thank you for letting me take this question, because it's something I'm really passionate about. I think how your call for sessions goes really sets up kind of the trajectory of your event. For a lot of events, it can be your first marketing campaign before you even launch your registration. So it signals to the community what kinds of topics you're planning on covering. Um, I also really feel strongly that the CFS shouldn't just be a form that you put up, an email you send out. It's really an opportunity for you to do some real work in your community where you're going out, you're finding new voices, you're kind of taking a pulse on what people are excited about based on what they're submitting. It can definitely impact the actual content strategy for your event based on what your community wants to talk about. I think you should really just be targeted in your approach. And it's also an opportunity to kind of sell your event without the straight sell of registration. It's a soft welcome and a soft opening to get folks interested in your event.
I love that. I love I had this listed as a quote for you, Rachel, but I'm having issues with my screen share. But I love this ethos of treating your call for sessions as the launch campaign for your event. Like, what a brilliant way to kick off. Stephanie, can you help set the stage for us as well? And then, and then we're going to dive in just so folks have a grasp for what we're going to talk about today. We're going to kind of move through 3 core motions. One is we're going to talk through just what are the foundations for a great call for sessions. The second motion is we're going to talk about effective promotion and engagement strategies. And then the third is we're going to talk about how to measure and optimize your call for sessions for success. So those are the kind of the 3 areas we're going to jump into. But before we do, Stephanie, what are some of the biggest challenges that you're seeing from your point of view as folks look to improve and optimize their call for sessions?
Sure. I mean, I think over the years, there have been a lot of main themes that run through challenges. I think one of them is it can be 2 sides of the same coin. I think oftentimes what I've seen is really being a victim of our own success in that we get so many interested folks who really have impactful, meaningful stuff to share that we don't have enough real estate in our content mix to accommodate. So figuring out how we make all of those submissions the most tailored, the most relevant, and so our customers and internal stakeholders have to hear decline less. That has been, like I said, I've been doing it for years, and that's always a theme that event content folks wrangle.
Quality over quantity.
Exactly.
So as folks look to go launch their call for sessions, what are some of the things that they need to have in consideration to be successful?
I could take this one. So I think the 3 buckets that I tend to consider when we're getting ready to launch our call for sessions is I want to make sure we have a solid event content strategy, and we have a solid marketing strategy. And then we also understand what our goals are. I think with any marketing campaign, you would have those, and this is no different. When it comes to your event content strategy, and this is a way that I also kind of explain what event content is it's basically the center of your kind of what your industry is talking about, what your company priorities are, and then what your audience has indicated to you that they want to learn more about. And as the event content person, you sit in the middle of all of those things and you help translate between those 3 groups, kind of what your event needs to succeed. So your event content strategy drives what your form looks like. It drives, the things you're going to be asking your attendees for. If you want to understand, or if you want to plan for a certain number of sessions at a particular level of experience or sessions around certain topics, I think those are all things you need to have documented, approved, and ready to go in order to kind of set your submitters up for success, along with kind of the materials that's part of it. Materials you would need to set your submitters up for success. And I think we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Thank
Yeah.
you for pulling this up, Brian. One thing I want to say is this is a slide that I also use for other people who do event content. this is a slide that I use to explain my job, basically what I do, because I think it's still sort of a new role for people to wrap their heads around.
Yeah, I think I'm curious on just like Stephanie, on your perspective and in your take, when you think about balancing these three core priorities to create great event content, how do you approach it?
Well, I think one of the important things to be clear about is that I think not a lot of people who work in event content realize how highly cross-functional it is. And to be able to have those conversations to nail that sweet spot is in Rachel's slide there is really important. It takes a lot of understanding of corporate strategy. It takes a lot of listening to what the customers, the attendees are looking for, and trying to balance all of those competing priorities in a very finite amount of space and time. Um, so I just wanted to put that out there. I mean, all our event content folks who are really in the thick of it, that's not news. But in case there's anybody out there who's just in the events world in general, I think it's important to be aware of those kind of that cross functionality.
Mm-hmm. How I'm curious from either of you, like what are some guardrails to keep yourself focused and to keep things moving in the right direction? Because I kind of feel like, right, like with all of those competing priorities, and to your first point, Rachel, around like quality over quantity, like it sort of feels like at some point we have to like put up some guardrails for ourselves so that like the list doesn't just keep going. So I'm curious, like, do you have any tactics or tips that you use to put areas of focus in place to make sure that you're getting the highest quality as you're managing those competing priorities?
Yeah. So I think I'm taking your question kind of in two different directions with guardrails. There's
That's
guardrails
fine.
around um, actual numbers around the kinds of sessions that we need to have, and so ensuring that we're actually getting enough. If you think about, a standard marketing funnel, if you want to get to X%, you need to start at Y. You need to make sure you have X number of submissions on a certain topic so that you have enough to accept. So I think about that. We as a team, the content team that I manage and sort of our stakeholders that we work with, we align before we launch on, okay, if we need, X% of content for this audience persona, how are we going to market to that persona for the CFS? So that's one direction where I'm thinking about guardrails. But another one is to ensure the quality of our content. We ask questions that show a level of commitment from those who are submitting. So we ask for a detailed outline of your talk, not just a title and abstract. We ask for a full outline, and it's required. And that shows us that these are folks who are really putting some thought into what they want to talk about, and it gives us just more insight into what the session is going to be. So that's something else that we do.
I think that's great. I think, Stephanie, do you have anything differentiated from that, from your perspective?
Well, first of all, I love the idea of requiring an outline. I think that's wonderful. I know it's there's this whole back and forth about like how many questions should we ask? Like how labor intensive do we want this call per sessions to be? And there's a lot of strong arguments on either side if you want to put it on either side, on two sides. But yeah, I mean, I think in terms of guardrails, one of the things we do is like we have to start with essentially, like you said, the content strategy and allocations. Like we have to know what we're working with. So it's a very nuts and bolts thing. You have to know your space, which you probably already do to some extent. You have to know how much of what, and then make sure that you're communicating your timeline really clearly and
Mhm.
broad to everybody that needs to know with as much runway as you can give them. Because a lot of
Mm,
these are very fixed. And I think time creeps up on everybody. And certainly if you're mulling over a good idea, then, time tends to slip away sometimes. But really to say like, make sure it gets in. And this is part of what we're going to talk about later is an enablement strategy. to make sure that we are able to close when we need to close, and we do get all the best ideas in during that time frame. So I think those kind of guardrails and making sure they're broadly communicated is really critical to getting that quality over quantity.
Mm. You said something that reminded me of a conversation that I was having last week with an event content team, and they had mentioned that in order to get the most value out of their call for sessions, they're actually being really diligent around what questions can we get answered through our speaker onboarding and our speaker training, and like later in the process after a session's submitted, so that we can make the call for sessions as concentrated and focused on what we need right here, right now. And I just thought that was like such a great piece of advice. And, your comment around speaker onboarding and, the enablement pieces, like there's a lot that we're going to learn in the process. You all know this of, building relationships and fine tuning the content with our speakers. I'm curious, you both kind of dabbled on this, but before we move on from this, could you walk us through, from your point of view, what are some of the core elements of an event content strategy? And kind of what I mean is, kind of starting with the key message and corporate vision and distilling that all the way down. Like, what are the core elements that you have in consideration when it comes to terms of putting together your call for sessions?
Rachel, I think you had some really great insights about this when we presented at SEMA.
Yeah. So I kind of alluded to it a little bit before, but we get really technical on who our personas are and how we are planning on programming for each one. So, for example, for those who don't know, GitHub, we're a developer platform. We're the home for all developers, but developers aren't the only people who come to our events. So we have a really detailed persona strategy around within the developer community, different folks and what they might care about. If you get to kind of a more senior level and then even the most senior level within engineering, and we're thinking about the topics that each one of those audience cares about, and we call them their jobs to be done. What are their kind of day-to-day tasks? What kinds of content can we create to address those? So we get really niche or really specific in that way. And then we take that and it informs a submission guide that we write for our audience so that they understand the exact topics we're looking for. We think about kind of the delivery format of our content. So what's going to be, in person, live, what's going to be streamed, what's going to be pre-recorded. So we're taking that into consideration with our content strategy. We're thinking about who our speakers are, the breakdown of our speakers. So, we have a strong percentage of GitHub employees who speak. So we're thinking about how we're going to be marketing to them. We have kind of all of those audience personas I just mentioned. We have a really strong open source community, and there's different groups within that we're thinking about. So we're thinking about all of our different audiences. We're thinking about, as a company, what are our goals and how are we addressing any potential, product announcements that we're going to be making? How are we planning for that in our agenda? And also general kind of session format and learning preferences of our audiences. So, for folks who want to kind of sit and listen, making sure we're programming for that content, but we have an audience that really likes to get interactive and learn about our tools and use them. And so, if we want to have more content that's focused on that, how are we planning for that? We introduced a new session format last year called the sandbox session, which is basically, I call it a mix of a demo and a workshop where the speaker will do a demo of a singular feature. And then the attendees who are in a lab style setting will have an opportunity to play around with that feature. So it's for folks who want to kind of a little more than a demo, but aren't quite ready for a full workshop. So when we're thinking about those kinds of things, we're thinking about our session types, we're thinking about who our speakers are, we're thinking about the topics that both our audience is interested in and we as a company want to be talking about.
Amazing. Stephanie, I'm curious, as we kind of put a bow on just building a great foundation for call for papers, like, are there common pitfalls, watch outs that you see teams stumble into that you think are helpful to call out, and maybe some suggestions on how to avoid them?
Yeah, I mean, I think like called out one earlier, which is time. Time is a thing.
Mhm.
And also like we haven't really touched on building a call for sessions, but when you build it, which is something that, you can do in Session Board, you can do in other platforms as well. The testing component is really, really important. And I think carving out enough time to thoroughly test it is critical to its success. This is, it's one of those things. If you're in technology, you understand you're in a technology company, the technology goes haywire. All of the I's aren't always dotted and the T's aren't always crossed when you need them to be. And so building in time and communicating again that time in your timeline for testing the build is really important. It's kind of sacrosanct and shouldn't be encroached on. Um, because that is when you're going to get more kind of frustrated um, submitters. And that's what you don't want because a lot of them are your customers. Um, yeah. So that's what I would say is just
You,
in the
you just
word on building, but I definitely know that you need to protect that time.
you just inspired a headline I want to tack onto that. And
Uh-oh.
it's kind of in addition to the call for sessions, is not only your first marketing campaign, it's the event experience begins at the call for sessions.
Yeah, absolutely.
True.
Uh,
Totally.
so that's the headline that I would shout out from that piece of advice. I have a question that I had saved for later if we had more time, but I think it kind of works nicely in here. And the three of us were talking about this like behind the scenes, and I even mentioned this to a colleague the other day as well. And it's this idea that like when you build your call for sessions, in what cases is the CFS serving as more than just the
Mhm.
call for the session? And I think like a great example that I'll just pull from my own background is like, when in my days when I was running a major brand event, our speaker selection process was really, really white glove. And in a lot of cases, like we probably had 85% of our speakers dialed in before anything, before we even got started. And I would leverage a call for sessions to help deepen content, but it was also, this sounds terrible, and I think a lot of us probably do this, but it was kind of my way of being like, oh my gosh, I have all this speaker interest, and like I need a method and a process to say no, but I need to like fill my speaker funnel for other activations and other marketing activities throughout the year. So I'm going to use this as a way to do that. So I'm just curious, like, what are some of the best practices that you see around leveraging a call for sessions for something beyond more holistically?
Yeah, I love talking about this. Um, we factor that into our review process. So as we're reviewing submissions, I have reviewers answer a question that's basically, if we don't use this for universe, what else could this be useful for? And I have options where it's, blog post, a case study, a podcast, a video, um, internal learning and development. And folks will answer that question as they're reviewing. So it'll be really easy for me after, we've sort of made our decisions and we've notified folks. For the folks who aren't going to speak, I pull those reports and I share them out with the relevant groups. So for our customer marketing team, I'll give them a list of submissions from customers that we couldn't accept. And then they can follow up with those folks and ask them to do a case study or a blog post or a video. We have a really robust internal learning and development team. And every month they do something called a day of learning, where it's folks who work at GitHub teaching each other about various topics. So I'll take all the submissions from our employees and give it to that team. And then they have a group of folks who are internal who want to speak. And so here's an opportunity for them to do it. So I think
Cool.
to your point, it's something that a lot of folks don't think about. To be clear, I don't promise this to anyone, meaning folks who submit, I don't promise that they might be considered for something else, because I don't want to set expectations that we might not be able to fulfill. But it doesn't mean we're not going to use those lists for other things.
I love that, Rachel.
great.
I love that you're able to use those internal submissions in a way that really like amplifies the employee voice and employee expertise, like that's great. I would echo what you said about being really clear about expectations. I've worked several events that are just so big and have, I guess, the response is so big that, we're turning away like all of the company's submissions, which is really hard. And, if they submit like 10 sessions, um, it's really hard to say like, yeah, we'll get you in. So I would say like, this is part of a process. And we're going to talk about, promotion enablement and how to get that quality over quantity even in a way that even if you can't accept a quality session, it's quality. And you can confidently put it forward as a blog post or a webinar or whatever. But yeah, I think these things go hand in hand. But yeah, that's something that I've always kind of it's been on my radar to be explicit about, hey, we may or may not be able to use this, but it's great content.
That's great. Andrea had a great question in the chat. She wanted to know, how do you feel about limiting submissions to one per person, encouraging putting your best foot forward?
That's tough.
You go ahead. Go ahead, Steph. I think but you go first.
It depends on the nature of your event. So like I said at the beginning, most of my events have been large scale tech events where usually our customers are quite big. They're larger enterprise size. We don't have a lot of like SMB customers. And so if you do have an SMB customer, it is a little bit easier to limit it, I think. But when you're working with a large company, like, think of a large company. Don't put any brand names out there, but maybe some that are in the PNW or some that are, in the Bay Area. These submissions are coming from all different parts of the company. So it's hard to say like, okay, well, I want one from your engineering department and we're going to take one from your, your sales team and then another one from this department, another one from that department. And then that's when you get like 10 submissions. Additionally, it is common for one person to be kind of that company's representative and input all of those submissions from different areas around the company. So that person, it looks like they've put forth and they want to speak on like 10 different sessions, but really they're just the middleman. They're just the person who's inputting the information. And there are like fields to capture that in a lot of platforms, like what's the submitter name, et cetera. So it looks like, Joe Schmo, it's very clear to see like who's submitting what. But what we usually say in our language in the CFS, about to say CFP, in the CFS is guidance, is that to, oh gosh, I'm gonna mess it up. But to have the strongest chance of getting your submission accepted, we recommend a maximum of 3 entries that are well crafted, basically. Maybe put in sort of gently terms of well crafted. But we do insert guidance. We don't have a hard and fast rule in the CFS. Hope that helped.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Case.
I was going to say something pretty similar, is that I don't necessarily set a limit, but we would give that guidance too. Is it makes more sense for you to put all of your energy into a smaller number of submissions, and we'll notice if you're basically submitting the same topic 5 different ways.
Yeah.
We've
done this before.
Yeah.
I was actually, I'm gonna ask you a question about this at the end, but I'm actually in the middle. I have a submission deadline this week for a call for sessions, so I'm even in the thick of it, submitting as a speaker myself. And I stumbled into a criteria that I thought was interesting, where you could submit up to 3 sessions from one company or organization, but you had to submit different speakers. Like the same speaker could not be submitted more than once, which I thought was like a really interesting way to like expand speaker diversification and topic expertise in a nice way. And I just appreciated that as I was like in the thick of being like, oh, I can't just like mass spam them submitting myself to speak. I have to be really thoughtful about who I'm selecting.
That's cool. I'm also
Very
curious
cool.
about the technology that would enable that requirement. But
Yeah.
but that's cool. That's a really neat idea.
Awesome.
Mhm.
All good inputs. I'd love to move into thinking more about promotion, engagement, enablement. So I think you kind of teased us a little bit, Stephanie, earlier, but from both of your perspectives, I'm curious to just play in the sandbox around what are great promotion strategies, both internally and externally, that you use and leverage, but also that you see other events leveraging.
Totally. I can provide a short use case on how. So formerly, I was with Tableau, Salesforce company, and during the spring, we were working on the Tableau conference call for sessions, and we were working with a leaner team than we had normally had, or had previously had, I should say. And as I think a lot of people in the events world can identify with, shorter runways. So it feels like every year runways get shorter. So we were wanting to do more with less and in less time. And so we were thinking about, okay, how we just don't have the personnel to sort through all the submissions that we had gotten, for example, the year prior. So we said, okay, we're going to be really clear. We need to have a really strong enablement strategy behind this, a strong communication strategy behind what we're doing, so that we have that, like we've been saying over and over, that quality over quantity. So we worked cross-functionally with our marketing department, our content marketing department, our sales enablement folks, to create a guide, like a submission guide, as Rachel mentioned earlier, and basically tailor it to different formats. So tailoring it to be a blog post that can be on LinkedIn, for example, that will really give our attendees like, hey, this is the cheat sheet. These are the 5 things that we're looking for. So to, again, improve your chances of being accepted, we would encourage you to submit on these 5 topics. We work with product marketing to make sure that that lined up with their initiatives. Um, like I mentioned, we reached out to the sales department and made sure that our AEs, our CSMs understood what we were looking for so they could go to their customers and say, hey, we'd love you to speak. Here's these topics. And help them help the customers to submit something that is relevant. And we ended up seeing really strong results from that. The topics were, or excuse me, the submissions, we had fewer, which is good, but we had to communicate to leadership that fewer is better. We want these submissions to be solid. We want to be able to accept as many as we can. And we saw that happen. So overall, it was a great success. And I would just say if you want to work with your communications team, your marketing team, your enablement team, give them runway too. So start early. Um, Start with working with them early. They have editorial calendars. They have, motions that they're working with and campaigns that they're working with. So just, time is important, and get ahead of it as much as you can. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I was going to go back to another point in our conversation, but it just went out of my head. So, Rachel, what do you think?
Yeah, I know. I agree with all of that. I think just to add on a couple more tactical things that we do. We do a lot with video. So when we have our video team on site at our event, I I ask them to think about a sizzle reel for our CFS campaign. And so I give them questions to ask speakers that have to do with why it's so great to speak at our event, because that's a promotional video that we can use to promote our CFS. Here's some people who spoke at Universe last year. This is why they loved it. You should apply to speak today. I also have employees for kind of an internal enablement campaign. We had employees who spoke at our event the year before provide different tips. So they were employees who submitted via the CFS. They got accepted. So I asked them to film like a tip per person of what to do, what to think about when you're submitting. And then we used those videos and used them internally with other coworkers. So I think having a really strong internal enablement program is important. both to get more of your employees to submit, especially if you have the same employees speaking every year, you want to diversify that group. Um, Understanding ahead of time which kind of groups within the company you're going to promote to. And also, this is similar to what you were saying, Stephanie, but how to enable the customer facing groups to recruit those customers to submit to speak as well, providing them with email copy, social media copy, imagery. If you work for if you work for a company that has some kind of product, is there somewhere within that product that you could be promoting your CFS? When someone logs in, can you have an ad that promotes the call for sessions? You have that platform where your target audience is all day, every day. Use it. We do that as well.
Yeah, as you both were talking, I'm even reminded of like my own past like trip ups and failures on this. A couple of years ago, like we didn't have a great like baked process for internal engagement and in terms of kind of finding great speakers, just like across our company through all the pools of relationships that sales has, that customer success has. And the lack of process, I think one of the upsides was we had a marketing team that was and an event team that was very, very connected to the customer. So we had great relationships with our customers. And when we didn't give ourselves enough time and when we didn't have a process, like reaching out to speakers that we wanted to recruit, would result in basically us stepping on another team's toes because we would end up asking someone to speak who's actually like maybe dissatisfied or having issues with our product and right. And so now we're creating like internal issues just through not giving ourselves the time and not having enough process. So putting myself in the hot seat and calling out like, areas where I've tripped up personally in the past in this process. Oh, I think you're muted, Stephanie.
Sorry. I think that's a really great point, and it makes me think of another instance to kind of watch out for. Like, if I think what we're getting at too is like this is a holistic process. It seems maybe that it's very sort of broken into steps, but really it's to your advantage to look at it as a whole. And it reminds me of a time when, like I said, we had to decline the entirety of a company's submissions, so several submissions from one company, and then we had to, as the process advanced, and we were getting closer to working on sessions, working on keynotes in a very tangible way, we had to reach out to that company and say, "Hey, do you want to speak in a session? Do you want to speak in a keynote?" And they did not take that very well. So I would really try to work with, again, cross-functionally, talk to your keynote teams, talk to your customer marketing. Customer marketing is a vital partnership if you have that in-house, just so that you're keeping the customer happy and we're looking at it from like bird's eye view as possible.
Yeah, that's great advice. As we're getting towards the time's flying, we're already 40 minutes in. I want to make sure that we do talk about KPIs and measuring and optimizing for success. But before we do, I just want to see like really quickly, do either of you have any tips or suggestions, kind of like one of two things, like how to find speakers to make sure that you're meeting any of your DE&I initiatives, making sure that you have a diversified pool of speakers. I think a part of that too is like, how are you finding the next best speaker that you don't know about yet? And yeah, I'm just kind of curious if you have any suggestions for folks tuning in.
Yeah. There's two things that I can quickly say. One is in the speaker survey for that year's event, we have a question where we ask speakers, do you have any other colleagues, or is there anyone else you know who would be a great speaker for Universe?
Cool.
So there's one thing we do. And also consider doing if you do a call for sessions, a call for presentations, a call for papers, consider also doing a call for speakers only. So it's a much easier lift for someone to sort of raise their hand and say they're a subject matter expert in XYZ topic versus having to come up with a whole session. And that gives you a bench of folks who, if you're going to have to curate some of your own content. Not 100% of your content is going to come from the CFS, at least it doesn't for us. that'll give us a bench of people who, could be new to our event. If you have any kind of community related folks who you work in your organization, having them kind of recommend people, having them go out to different community LinkedIn groups, networks, message boards, promoting your event is something we do as well.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on what Rachel said in that this is an excellent question. I think so. When I was at Tableau, we had an Office of Inclusive Marketing, which was a fantastic idea. I don't think
Cool.
it exists any longer, but we learned so much because we really wanted to improve our DEIA representation. And to us in event marketing world or event content world, it's like, well, yeah, throw questions about self-identification, like in the CFS. And what they said, which was totally on point, is that people have overlapping identities. So people are, if you have to select one thing, a lot of people aren't one thing. And that really pigeonholes people into a certain identity. And in some cases, it can be illegal to collect that information. So be really careful. I think exactly the way to seek out a more diverse speaker pool is exactly what Rachel said, is to go to where they are. Like, don't wait for everybody to come to you. Go to where they are already. And from what we heard from our in-house experts, like that's the best approach. Um, it's not like if you can see it, you can be it. It's like, no, we want you. We truly want you. This is how we're messaging that out. So it's DEI representation is it's a very kind of tough nut to crack. And I was in a networking event actually where Chris Carber, the Session Board CEO, was out a few months ago, and it was a very hot topic and a lot of different perspectives. So I would say have a lot of conversations, and do some research, to determine what is the best approach for you.
Great advice. I one last question on this because I was talking to someone actually yesterday who had mentioned to me that they do it's a full blind review process for all of their sessions. And they actually found that organically, by the nature of doing blind reviews and accepting sessions blindly, that they were getting new speakers. They weren't going back to all the usual suspects. No offense to all the usual suspects. And they ended up with a more diverse pool, which I thought was really interesting. Is that something that you've seen or have any experience with?
I'll just add that I think that while we do want to see new faces, it's really important. I do think there's also, you can have basically speaker rock stars that literally people come to the event to see. So I would say identify those folks, put them in sort of a separate bucket, and then move forward. I don't think I've done like a blind review like that, but Rachel, have you used that tactic?
No, we haven't. Not that I think there's anything wrong with it. It hasn't been part of our process.
Got it. Cool. I was just curious.
Yeah.
I also just want to call it that Debbie in the chat mentioned that they do both a call for sessions and a call for speaker interest, and it helps them add more names and just add more health to their speaker database, which I think is a great tip. So thanks for throwing it in there, Debbie. Okay, as we wrap, I'm going to share my screen again because I think like what you both are going to talk through, it might be easier just for folks to see in a list and you can screenshot, but let's just talk about call for sessions, KPIs, and what are the different measurements that matter most to you in terms of your process and the outcomes that you're looking for. And so I'm just going to share my screen.
This is
here.
Rachel's. It's my favorite part of the presentation.
Oh,
Thank you. Yeah, this is important to have, first of all, we mentioned this at the beginning, to have this before you launch your CFS so that you know what your goals are. At GitHub, we look at all of these things. So obviously, do what works best for you. And I'd ask if there are folks in the chat who don't see a KPI they use on this list to share it with us, because I'm always looking for new information too. But I think something that we focused on a lot, I've been at GitHub for almost 2 years now, and something that we focused on a lot last year and this year was that second bullet, the percentage of content sourced from your CFS. So we get a lot of submissions at GitHub, and um, it was pretty overwhelming, honestly, for our team to review all of them. And in 2024, this past year, we really focused on reducing the quantity and increasing the quality. So I really took a look at decreasing the number of submissions we got and increasing that second bullet, the percentage of content we sourced. In 2023, about half of our content came from our CFS, and the rest was content that we curated. In 2024, that went up. Now it was 60% from the CFS and 40% curated, which I was really proud to see. So it meant that all the upfront work that we had done to help our submitters be more successful proved to have the result we wanted. We also, and maybe this is the opposite of some people, what some people have said to do is we added questions to our form because we wanted to make it harder to submit, because we wanted to reduce that number. And the questions that we asked were questions that focused on quality. They were that detailed outline question. We asked for a speaker video. It wasn't required, but it was something that we prioritized for folks who submitted videos, so we could actually see the speaker and see their stage presence. So I'm happy. I don't want to talk through the laundry list of all of these, but I wanted to call out those in particular of KPIs that folks might not be measuring, is just, how much of your content comes from the CFS, and also how do you use these KPIs to show that the quality is rising rather than just the quantity.
Amazing. I'm kind of curious real quick, just from everybody tuning in, I just want to get a sense of how, what is your session acceptance rate, and how much of your speakers and content are sourced from the CFS. So I just have a quick poll. This might not totally accurately capture it, but we have a few buckets here of 75% or greater, none, half, a quarter. So just trying to get a sense from everybody tuning in.
And this is a session acceptance rate from the CFS, is that correct?
From the CFS, yeah. So I'm seeing 25 to 50%. Half of the folks here accept 10 to 25%. Wow, cool. And actually, the more time goes by and the more people respond, we're seeing 25 to 50% go down and 10 to 25% go up. 10% accept 75% or greater. Interesting. Okay. Beth, we were talking about this earlier. It's possibly harder to get into Harvard than it is to get into our breakouts. That's amazing.
So Beth, not to out you, Beth, but she does content for Splunk, and Splunk is we were going to talk about kind of CF, call for sessions we admire. Splunk was going to be mine. They do an incredible job of setting their submitters up for success. They do a webinar, they do videos, they have a ton of different resources for submitters. So Beth would be a great person to talk to on this topic. She's got a lot of good knowledge.
That's amazing. Beth, I might have to follow up with you on this. That's amazing. That's great. Thanks for everybody. Awesome. Thanks everybody for responding. I'm going to wrap that poll up, and I can share the results. I didn't think I shared. Can you guys see the results?
Sure can.
Cool. Yeah. So that's, it looks like a good majority of you accept less than 25%. Very cool. Very cool. Thank you. That was interesting.
Right. I have so many questions that here's my question.
Like what?
Here's my question. So folks on the call in the chat, can you say, do you want to increase your number of folks who don't accept high percentage of sessions from their CFS? Do you want to increase that number, or are you happy with where it is?
Yeah, just throw in like an increase, decrease. This is our third year with the CFS. We are increasing every year. Cool.
Great. It looks like we're also getting some
Awesome.
questions in the Q&A.
Oh, thank you for calling that out. Okay. Well, this is great because we're kind of getting to the top of the hour, so we want to start wrapping up. But do want to take your questions. So, Alex asked, do you choose sessions and then fit submissions into those sessions, or do you plot successful submissions straight into your agendas?
So a little bit of both. That may not to answer the question directly, but I think there's a mix of what we do. So before we launch the CFS, we know that there are sessions we're going to have certain, we're going to make some product announcements, so we need to earmark slots for that. We have folks on our executive team who our attendees look forward to hearing from every year. We know we need to earmark slots for that. We have general topics that we know we want to focus on, and so there are some submissions that knock it out of the park, and we're like, we have to have this topic. So I think it's a mix of having slots that we know from exact speakers we know who are going to speak. We have topics that we know we need to focus on, and so we find submissions from the CFS that align to those topics, and then we have just sessions that we didn't expect that we think are wonderful and hit on some really interesting industry topics that we should have. So I think it should be a mix of all of those things.
Yeah, and I think it also kind of depends, which is, I hate that answer, but like at one of my prior companies, we had a huge community base, and which is wonderful. And so they would get their submissions, everyone would get their submissions up through the CFS. A lot of times if we have like internal folks, like there's a little bit more finagling that has to go on. And so some tracks might have a higher percentage of sessions go into the CFS than other tracks. So it really kind of depends. But I don't think there's like a right way to do it. We've also tried like getting even everything internal into the CFS, and that created some unnecessary churn, even though I think process-wise our intentions were in the right place. But again, like this is also usually these relationships internally are not a one and done. These are relationships that you nurture over time. So listen to what folks want, and what works for you from a business strategy and process perspective.
It's good advice. We had one other question. On average, how long do you keep the call for speakers open for submission?
I'm really glad someone asked this because there was something that I wanted to say kind of about this. And it was going to be in kind of the pitfalls section. Something you often see is, and everyone knows this, it's a hockey stick. So no matter how long you keep the CFS open, whether it's 2 weeks or 6 weeks, everything is going to come at the very end. And I tested this theory when we went from 2023 to 2024. In 2023, our CFS was open for 6 weeks. So we gave people plenty of time. And the majority of it came in kind of the last couple of days. And this year, we shortened it to 3.5, 4 weeks. And I was kind of biting my nails because it was, 2 weeks in, we didn't really have very much. 3 weeks in, we were starting to grow, but not to the numbers that I wanted us to be at. And then in the last week, the last 5 days, 50% of our submissions came in. And then in total, so by that point, we had 50% of our submissions. And then in the last 2 days, we got 80%, to 80%. We extended it for over the weekend, but then it was closed that Monday. So the majority of our submissions came in literally the last 2 days. So I don't think just to answer your question I don't think it matters. I think you should give yourself the amount of time you need to review everything and make the really thoughtful decisions around acceptance, and then work backwards from there, because submitters are going to submit at the end anyway.
They will. And I would say key to that is that enablement strategies that we talked about earlier. Also, guess who's guilty of that? Stephanie and Rachel, because we submitted for SEMA on the last day and we do this for a living. Yeah, we are our own proof point.
I will say it was
I-
pretty meta to submit a session
weird.
on the CFS.
And guess what? It was through Session Board.
We're going really meta. I'm gonna admit I white lied to y'all earlier. I said that I was submitting a call for sessions this week. It's due today at midnight. I've been called out. Y'all, we have 2 minutes left. I just want to say, Rachel, Stephanie, thank you so much for joining and giving of your time and your wisdom. This was so much fun. If folks want to get in touch with you, is there a great way where they can either connect with you or learn more about the work that you do?
Yeah.
Shamelessly, selflessly promote.
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, and I can throw my LinkedIn link in the chat. But if you search Rachel Cohen in GitHub, you'll find me. Actually, there is another Rachel Cohen at GitHub. If you search Rachel Cohen event content GitHub, you'll find me. So I'll put the link in the chat. And again, if you're interested in joining us for our monthly event content council meetings, I think, would it make sense, Brian, for them to put their email in the chat and then we'll follow up with them? Would that work?
Yeah, that sounds great. I also think I think Florence put something up earlier in the call, so I'm just gonna relink here. Oh, sorry, I'm moving too quickly. But I think Florence is interested.
Great.
She put her email in. Yeah, I think maybe what I can do is I'm gonna follow up with everybody here that attended. So if there's something that I can pass along for folks to sign up, get involved, would that be easiest?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, cool.
And then
And I'll pass along these emails in the chat to you both as well too. So
Thank you.
we'll dot all our I's and cross our T's.
Excellent.
Awesome.
So I only have a few seconds, but equally, you can find me on LinkedIn. Here's my profile in the chat. I'm now on the vendor side. I'm with Skillable. So if you should search Stephanie Wells Skillable, that's where you can find me. And yeah, we do hands-on labs for events. So look us up.
Beautiful. Well, thank you all so much. This was a ton of fun. And as always, we'll see you back next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, y'all. Bye.